Before any of this happened, I never thought of living alone as something to be nervous about. I was 22, finally free of a house I'd shared with 3 roommates who left dishes in the sink for weeks and fought about the water bill more than they ever paid it. When I found the garden-level apartment on Larkspur Street, it felt like winning something. It was the bottom half of an old 2-story house that had been split into separate homes years before I moved in, with the owner living upstairs and a private entrance around the side for my unit. The rent was low enough that I could actually save a little each month, working as a lab technician at the hospital across town, mostly early shifts, blood draws and paperwork, home most days by early afternoon. My landlord was a soft-spoken older man named Walter Halloway, who lived alone in the upper unit and handled every repair himself. He seemed almost old-fashioned in how attentive he was, always quick to fix a dripping faucet or swap a bulb in the stairwell, before I even had to ask twice. On my first day, he told me I'd never need to deal with a maintenance company because he took care of everything personally and that there were only 2 keys to my door in the world, mine and the spare he kept for emergencies. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found a landlord who actually cared. For the first 2 months, that apartment felt like exactly what I needed. Quiet street, quiet neighbors, a small fenced yard I shared with my dog, Biscuit, a scruffy terrier mix I'd adopted the year before. I kept a simple routine. Work, home, the laundromat on Thursdays, groceries on Sundays. I rarely went anywhere else, and when I did, it was never for long. It was a Tuesday evening when I first noticed something felt wrong. I came home from a closing shift and stood in the doorway a second too long, certain the apartment had been touched somehow, though nothing was obviously out of place. The kitchen chair I always pushed in was pulled halfway out. The bathroom light, which I would have sworn I'd turned off that morning, was on. There was a faint smell in the hallway, something like pipe smoke, unfamiliar and gone as quickly as I noticed it. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. I told myself I was tired, that 12-hour shifts made people forgetful, and I went to bed repeating that until I half believed it. Biscuit wouldn't settle that night. He kept pacing to the hallway closet and back, sniffing at the bottom of the door, whining low in his throat until I finally let him up on the bed just to quiet him. It kept happening after that, in small ways I could almost explain away one at a time. A blanket I always left folded on the couch would turn up refolded a different way. A candle I never lit would be half burned down on the counter. Once, my laptop, which I shut down completely every night without fail, was sitting open on standby when I got home. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together, it started to form a shape I didn't want to look at directly. I called my brother and told him what was going on. He laughed it off gently and said I was working too much, that I was probably doing these things half asleep and forgetting. I wanted to believe him more than I actually did. I started checking my locks obsessively, testing the doorknob 2 or 3 times before I could make myself walk away from it. It bought me a small, fragile peace, enough to get through a few more weeks without anything I couldn't rationalize. Then came the night that changed how I thought about all of it. I'd worked a closing shift, and it was almost midnight when I pulled into the driveway. My porch light ran on a timer so I could see clearly from the car that my front door wasn't shut. Not wide open, but off the latch, resting against the frame the way a door sits when it hasn't been pulled all the way closed. I sat there for a long moment, thinking about calling someone, waiting for someone, anything other than walking in by myself. Then I thought about Biscuit inside, and that thought was louder than any of my caution. I went in anyway. He was fine, curled up on the couch like nothing had happened. I checked every room. Nothing was gone. I locked the door behind me twice before I let myself breathe normally again. After that night, I stopped trying to explain things away and started testing the door itself. Every morning before work, I wedged a single dry strand of spaghetti into the bottom corner of the frame, low enough that no one would think to check for it, positioned so the door couldn't open without snapping it. Every single day I came home and found it broken on the floor. I want to be honest about how that felt. It wasn't just fear by that point. It was the understanding that whoever this was knew my schedule closely enough to know exactly when my apartment sat empty, sometimes for hours, and sometimes I would learn for only a minute or 2. I tested that once, walking to the end of the driveway to grab the mail, gone maybe 90 seconds by the clock on my phone. I came back to find the test broken and the porch light, which I hadn't touched, switched off. Whoever this was wasn't taking chances when they found them. They were watching for them. I called the police and started filing reports, even with almost nothing solid to hand them. No forced entry, no fingerprints, no witnesses, just a pattern only I seemed able to see. Walter was sympathetic every time I mentioned it, shaking his head, offering to install a second deadbolt, telling me how awful it was that something like this could happen on his property. I thanked him every time. I had no reason not to. Months passed like that. I got used to a low, steady dread every time I turned my key in the lock, half expecting to find it already open. My brother started staying over more often on the nights I worked late, and for a while, nothing worse happened. I let myself think, carefully, that maybe it was finally over. Then I came home on a rare day off and found my jewelry box open on the dresser, its little drawers pulled out and left that way. My mother had died when I was 17, and the one thing of hers I still wore every day, a thin gold ring, was gone. Everything else in that box was untouched. Just the ring. That was the first time anyone besides me had proof that something had actually been taken, that I hadn't imagined a single hour of any of it. The police took it more seriously after that, even though it never led anywhere. Walter seemed horrified, and personally rekeyed my lock that same week, standing in my doorway with a new brass key held out in his palm, telling me I'd be safe now. I finished the rest of my lease living that way, careful and worn thin, and I moved out the day it ended without ever learning who had been coming into my home. I didn't go back to that street again for 3 years. I only returned because a friend from that old life was getting married nearby, and on the morning of the wedding, on a whim I still can't fully explain, I drove past the house on Larkspur Street. There was a moving truck out front, and a young woman was carrying a box up the porch steps toward the garden unit. My old apartment. I don't know exactly why I stopped the car. Something about watching someone else begin what I had begun there pulled at me until I couldn't keep driving. She was friendly, glad for the break, and when I told her I used to live in that unit, her expression changed. She asked if I'd heard what happened to the last owner. I told her I hadn't heard anything since I moved out. She told me Walter Halloway had been arrested the previous winter, and that once people started looking closely into his history, they found he'd done this to a string of tenants over more than a decade. Always young women renting that same unit alone. Investigators had gone through the house afterward, top to bottom, and in the hallway of the garden unit, behind the built-in linen closet where I used to keep my towels, they found a second door. It didn't open from my side. It never had. It only opened from his. I stood on that porch and thought about the wall my bed had been pushed against for 2 years, the one that closet shared. I thought about how far away. I had always pictured him being on the nights my door was left open, or my little test on the frame turned up broken, some safe, uncrossable distance I could never quite calculate. He hadn't needed the front door most of the time at all. He had been stepping directly out of his own hallway into mine, close enough that a single sheet of drywall was the only thing that had ever separated us while I slept. I thought of Biscuit, pacing at that closet door on the nights I couldn't explain, and I understood, 3 years too late, exactly what he had been trying to tell me. I still check closets before I let myself sleep, in every place I've lived since, even now married, and states away from that town. And some nights I think about the tenants who lived in that unit before me, the ones who moved out quietly over the years with no explanation anyone remembered, and I wonder how many of them ever found out what I know now, and how many never got the chance to.